So I have just come back from watching The Rise of Skywalker, and having done my spoiler-free review, I am now going to give a spoiler-laden review. So if you haven't yet seen The Rise of Skywalker and you plan on seeing it and you don't want spoilers, do not watch this video. And if you do watch this video and I spoil the film for you, which I'm telling you I'm going to, do not blame me. This is all on you. So, spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. Hopefully I've made that clear. And I also have a First Order trooper here to act as my witness. So, you have been warned. Anyway, The Rise of Skywalker. As I said in my other video, I was thoroughly entertained by it. I was rooting for the characters. I was rooting for Rey's character in particular. I found her performance and that of Adam Driver extremely compelling. I thought that I was very pleased with how they dealt with Carrie Fisher. It did seem... Okay, now I can reveal things. The opening scenes in which Princess Leia is interacting with Rey, you obviously know when you're watching it that it was cobbled together from scraps from the cutting room floor from the previous two films. There's certain bits of dialogue that are kind of odd and don't really work. And you can see they're really stretching it as far as they can in terms of bringing back a character where the actor is no longer with us. But look, they did a good enough job, and the way that Carrie Fisher dies, that was very well thought out. So Carrie Fisher, not Carrie Fisher, General Leia dies. Oh, it seems so weird giving spoilers. She dies assisting Rey in a key lightsaber battle. And it's a similar deal to when Luke projected himself into another situation and saved the day. Leia does the same thing. But it's done in a way that kind of makes total sense and also adds to Kylo Ren's story, because Kylo Ren turns in the film. He starts off as we left. He's clearly a very troubled man, bent on forging his own legacy as a new Darth Vader. But he starts off very much as the villain, and as the film progresses, particularly after this fight with Rey, he turns. Now, I'm missing out a whole bunch of stuff. Should we just get to the elephant in the room, which is the biggest problem with this film? And again, I found it so entertaining, but here's the biggest problem. I think that J.J. Abrams has taken huge liberties with the opening scroll, because obviously we know that Palpatine returns, and the opening scroll, I forget the exact words, but I think the first few words are, "The dead are speaking again." You're like, whoa, calm down, JJ. What's going on here? And the opening scroll basically goes on to explain that Palpatine has re-emerged, no explanation as to why or how, and warned the galaxy that he is taking back control. And Kylo Ren is on a mission to hunt him down and kill him, because he perceives Palpatine to be a threat to his position as Supreme Leader, because having killed Snoke in the previous film, Kylo Ren is now Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. Which kind of makes sense, although we have to remember that Kylo Ren worships Darth Vader. So for someone who worships Darth Vader, it's difficult to imagine Kylo Ren having bloodlust for Darth Vader's master all of a sudden. But that's where we start off. So that doesn't make too much sense. And then we learn that not only is Palpatine back, but he's found a planet that no one knows about. Literally no one knows about. So that you have to go to extraordinary lengths to even find out how to get there. And it's a very arduous journey as well. He's found a planet that no one knew existed. And he's managed to build a fleet of ships that is larger than anything in the galaxy. A fleet of old type Star Destroyers, as far as I can tell. Exact same design, as far as I can tell, from the original trilogy. Only that they all have guns on them that can destroy entire planets. So they all have Death Star-like abilities. All of this fleet of Star Destroyers. So Palpatine... And this is when it hit me. It took me a while after walking out of the cinema to kind of put the pieces together. Because if you think about it, it kind of does a disservice to the prequels trilogy. Because the prequels trilogy, apart from telling the story of Anakin Skywalker and how Anakin came to turn into Darth Vader, the prequels trilogy also tells us how the Empire came to be. So that we start off with this tax dispute on the planet of Naboo and this devious Palpatine character who over the course of the 3 films manages to increase his power and influence to the point where in the third film, The Revenge of the Sith, he's able to basically he's able to give himself unlimited power to begin his empire. So it's taken him, and we learn as well that he's only able to do this through an elaborate scheme whereby he concocts a war so that he has an excuse to build a clone army, which later morphs into the Imperial army of stormtroopers. So there's this whole elaborate conspiratorial story in the prequels telling us how we get to Emperor Palpatine. And then over the course of the original trilogy, of course, the Empire is defeated, and Palpatine, as far as we know, well, first of all, we think he's dead, but at the very least, he's certainly back to square one, because the Empire is defeated, albeit the First Order rises out of the ashes of the Empire, but the First Order isn't, as far as I'm aware, on the same scale necessarily as the Empire. It's just basically copying the Empire's blueprint. But all the while that the First Order has been getting set up, a weakened and injured Palpatine has crawled to this planet, and without having an empire, because he's been dethroned, and without having the revenue that an empire would bring in terms of rearming, he's managed to build this immense fleet with powers that it took so long for him to engineer in just one Death Star. He now has those powers in all of these different... That is very difficult, and if you think about it, it kind of does a disservice to the whole prequels trilogy if Palpatine is able to go from Emperor to back to square one to, oh, I've got this immense fleet that can destroy a whole galaxy, or that can, run amok in the galaxy and destroy all the planets. But it's also unclear as to what his motives are. Because the other huge spoiler is that Rey is Palpatine's granddaughter. So that's why Rey, and you actually see at one point, she uses Palpatine, she unexpectedly produces Palpatine-like lightning at one scene fairly early on in the film, which is kind of a clue. And then it's revealed that she is, in a conversation with Kylo Ren, it's revealed that she is Palpatine's granddaughter. So that's kind of quite a lot to take in. And then I'm a little bit unclear on this. I'm going to have to watch the film probably a bit more to kind of get my head around it. But when Rey's parents left her on Jakku, apparently they left her on Jakku so that Palpatine wouldn't find her. And when they refused to divulge Rey's location to the Emperor, he had them killed. But if Rey is Palpatine's granddaughter, then that means that at least one of her parents was either Palpatine's son or daughter. It's not made clear, or maybe I missed it, but it wasn't made crystal clear which of Rey's parents was the child of Palpatine. And the way that whole story was told wasn't at all convincing in terms of, oh yes, and then I killed my son, because... And also, it's unclear as to the motives for assembling this immense fleet, because at one point, early on in the film, Palpatine strikes a deal with Kylo Ren so that Kylo Ren can have full use of the fleet. And then Kylo Ren gets double-crossed, and it's actually Rey who is, as Palpatine's granddaughter, supposed to inherit the fleet. But this is only after Palpatine has dispatched Kylo Ren with orders to kill Rey. So if his plan all along... Basically, I want to know what his plan all along was, and it wasn't made clear in the film. If his plan all along was that Rey have the fleet, then why did he order for her to be killed? And if his plan all along was for Kylo Ren to have the fleet, then why does he drop him so quickly? And it's also very clear in the closing scenes that he thinks very little of Kylo Ren anyway, because Kylo Ren is a Skywalker, at least as far as he's concerned. So that's kind of a crucial part of the whole story, which you could say is a sizable plot hole. Again, very casual use of the opening scroll in just kind of dropping us into this situation, but it isn't satisfactorily, at least from my point of view, it isn't satisfactorily explained why and how Palpatine is back. Not just how he survived, because I can kind of understand why a Sith, who's already told us in the prequels that the Sith can have the power to cheat death, I was kind of on board with that, but what isn't, for me, satisfactorily explained is what his motive is, and how on earth, from a weakened state, he's able to arguably accomplish more than he was able to accomplish over the 3 prequels when he acquired his power and built his empire. So that was the biggest problem. But look, I'll get over that. I guess I'll have to get over it, because there are problems that I've already mentioned in my Broadly Speaking video with A New Hope and with A Force Awakens. So look, it's science fiction, folks. You can't, not everything has to make sense. So if you're willing to just suspend disbelief and just go along for the ride and just enjoy the spectacle, then this film is going to entertain you. And to be honest, from one of the reasons why I think I find it hard to relate to the Star Wars Puritans, as I call them, is because my earliest recollections of Star Wars, I don't remember the story. It's only when, in later years, when I properly sat down and watched it, that I understood the story. My first memories of Star Wars was just the spectacle and just seeing those ships and just seeing, a fight against good and evil and lightsabers and the Millennium Falcon. Those were my earliest memories. The whole story didn't make a great deal of sense. So that was my starting point. And we've come full circle with me still able to enjoy just the spectacle and the escapism and the fantasy without all of the ins and outs of the story making sense. Another thing that Puritans are not going to be happy about is that the Force can now heal people. So there's this Jesus-like healing ability that Rey develops, which she first showcases in healing a giant snake. And so she realizes that she can heal this giant snake. And then in the crucial battle with Kylo Ren, just before Kylo Ren turns, in fact, the reason why Kylo Ren does turn is because Leia distracts Kylo Ren by reaching out to him through the Force. And in that moment of distraction, Rey dispatches Kylo Ren with his lightsaber. I'm not entirely sure, but anyway, she kills or fatally wounds Kylo Ren with the lightsaber, and Kylo is dying. And then Leia dies because this exertion of the Force kills Leia, and Rey heals Kylo with her newfound messiah-like Force powers. Puritans are not going to be happy with that because they're going to say, okay, why was this not a thing in any of the previous films? And to be honest, J.J. Abrams has a little bit of history in this regard because he did something similar with Star Trek. In the second Star Trek film, he made it so that you can transport between planets. You can just beam from one planet to another. You don't need a spaceship to get from one planet to another, which just steamrolled over the whole principle of Star Trek and actually trekking to places. It's no longer Star Trek, it's Star Beam, if you can just beam everywhere. And I think, again, J.J. Abrams, it's a little bit too much. He goes a bit over the top, I think, in deciding what is and isn't possible in these universes. And he's done the same thing here, you could argue, in just deciding arbitrarily that, oh, by the way, this is also something that the Force can do. You can heal people with it. And so this healing power is also used at the very end of the film when there's a very touching scene. Having fought with Rey against Palpatine, Kylo is apparently out of the picture. He's been tossed down a bottomless chasm by Palpatine as revenge for the way Palpatine was tossed down a bottomless chasm. And like Palpatine, Kylo Ren is able to emerge, but no, he's not Kylo Ren anymore. Sorry, he's Ben Solo. So Ben Solo is able to re-emerge, and Rey is stricken, fatally stricken. In fact, I think she's even dead, having exhausted all her powers defeating Palpatine, and Ben Solo uses what's left of his powers to heal Rey, and then Rey's alive, and Ben Solo Force vanishes. And it's funny, I was talking to Deanna, and by the way, Deanna loved the film. She just really enjoyed it. But I was saying to Deanna, it kind of would have been a bit awkward if Ben had survived, because they have a kiss at the end, and you're like, okay, I'm on board with Ben being a good guy now, but is this really where this is going? Because the audience is on board because they've followed Ben's journey, and they've seen, for example, I was thrilled with Harrison Ford making a brief cameo. He makes an appearance. He isn't a Force ghost. He's just part of Kylo Ren's memory, helping him remember who he is, and that was a really touching scene. So the audience has been on board for all of that, and they've seen why it is that Kylo Ren turns, but he'd have a hard time explaining to the presumably hundreds or even thousands of people he's terrorized or killed or oppressed that he's now a good guy. But the problem immediately solves itself because he vanishes. But I was also saying to Deanna that if you think about it, the whole story of him turning was quite successfully done, because turning either from the dark to the light or from the light to the dark is, throughout the whole saga, not an easy thing to do. If you think about it, it takes 3 films for Anakin to turn to the dark side, and the way it's done in Revenge of the Sith is arguably a little bit rushed towards the end, to the point where it's not really convincing the way it's done. It's like, oh, he's just a bit of an angry asshole and decides to burn everything around him. He goes on a self-destructive spiral. He's just an idiot, So it's not really compelling the way Anakin turns. The other turning, of course, is Darth Vader. So obviously Anakin becomes Darth Vader, but right at the end, Darth Vader turns good, but that's kind of a deathbed conversion. It just, it's like, okay, he hasn't got anything to lose at this point. He may as well say sorry and recant for all his atrocities. So neither of the Anakin turnings were really that compelling for me. But by comparison, and this is a major plus for The Rise of Skywalker, by comparison, Kylo Ren's turning back to Ben Solo is compelling and does drag you along and think, I can believe this, because it's kind of been set up already in Last Jedi, which obviously lots of people hate, but that's one thing. That's actually one favour that you could say Rian Johnson did for J.J. Abrams, is actually tee up the prospect of Kylo Ren turning to the light, because he and Rey obviously develop a connection unexpectedly in The Last Jedi. And if it weren't for all of that groundwork that Rian Johnson did in Last Jedi, it would have been impossible to imagine, you could argue, Kylo Ren becoming a good guy. But combining the groundwork in Last Jedi and the circumstances surrounding the lightsaber duel with Rey, the whole thing with Leia, her final act of allowing Rey to strike the fatal blow when Rey was on her knees almost, and also the cameo by Harrison Ford when Rey basically has to escape to do her thing and leaves Ben or Kylo all conflicted as to what's just happened, and then Han Solo appears and reassures him. And when you put all of these things together, it's completely understandable why he would think, what am I doing? I'm going to turn my back on Kylo Ren and go back to being Ben Solo, so that in the final scene, when Rey is up against Palpatine and Ben Solo arrives and unites with her, it makes sense, or at least it did for me. Maybe not for everyone, but for me, it was at least a more compelling turning than the Anakin / Darth Vader turnings that had happened before. But yeah, the big problem for me if I'm going to single out my biggest problem, it's the whole issue of basically Palpatine's motives. I don't even mind so much that he's back. I actually really like, I can't think of his name now. Google to the rescue. There we go. Ian McDiarmid. I really love Ian McDiarmid's creation. It's a really enduring villain that has been created. So it's nice to see Palpatine back. It's just that J.J. Abrams doesn't even try to explain what his motives are. And for a villain to be really, really compelling and really, really scary, you have to know what they want, what they're after. And that's just not explained at all. And just another quick mention that the Sith kind of evil layer, for me, was very intimidating. I think that was another triumph, was to make this a genuinely intimidating place. And one thing that this film does superbly is layer on a whole lot of meaning as to who the Sith are, what they're all about, what their kind of, you could say, mythology or theology is. What their, you leave the cinema knowing far more about the Sith than you knew probably from just watching the previous films. So that is everything that I can think of for my immediate response to this film. I'll probably have other things to say in future videos, and it will be interesting to see whether my thoughts change with time. But those are my initial reactions to The Rise of Skywalker. And it's time to put the Bunker Trooper back on the shelf, because that's it.